This is Tristan,
And this is PJ.
and we are presenting to you the Festerburg podcast. We will be discussing some experiences we have had in dealing with theology and questions of faith and the Bible, and especially what we also experience or see in the Lutheran Church and theology. Today we have a topic that I think is quite relevant to many young people, especially today, but is also something that our modern age has to deal with, and that is doubt. Pirje and I have had many discussions about this theme because we definitely experienced it in different ways and at different stages of our lives. And we actually want to ask some questions about doubt and try to respond to these questions. So, first, we actually ask, what is doubt? Uh, and maybe Pierre, you can say something.
Well, thank you, Tristan. Yeah. You know, doubt, I think I would approach in the first instance as one wants to say a polar opposite of faith. But at the very same time, I think that's quite a jump because so often our faith exists alongside of doubt and in tension with it. So perhaps one can begin to understand doubt more clearly by contrasting it to faith, but not necessarily opposing it to faith. So perhaps, Tristan, it wouldn't be a bad idea for us to begin with a more fundamental question. If doubt is the absence of faith, or shall one say the faltering of faith, then it begs the question, well, what is faith?
Yeah,
And perhaps I throw that to you.
exactly. It immediately makes you think of a big story that we often hear in the Bible, which is the story of Jacob wrestling with God.
Mm.
And this is actually where Jacob challenges God, where he isn't actually fully trusting God yet, but he's actually, yes, engaging with God, wrestling with God, um, seeing whether this God is really almighty and stronger and more powerful.
Trying to get a grip on him.
Yes. And then as he tries this, he realizes he can't get a grip on this God. This God ultimately is his Lord and will bless him. And so he is also named as Israel, the one who wrestles with God. And this is the name for the people who also live in the land of Israel, the Israelites, um, which is also a people that wrestled with God. And this kind of journey or this relationship then that you have with God is to me a first idea or that I understand as faith,
Mm.
as wrestling with God.
Wrestling, trying to get get to grips with him, relating to him in one sense or another. I think that's very helpful. It kind of reminds me of a sermon by our great mentor, Pastor Felix Mailan, um, on this topic of Jacob wrestling with God, and then getting to the other side of the river, but not walking away unscathed, with
Yeah,
quite a bit of a limp. I mean, yes, one can grapple and one can engage, but it's not a cost-free engagement. There's quite a lot that hangs in the balance. Um, but nice story notwithstanding, I would like to introduce perhaps a little bit of a different approach. Faith. I always, in my mind, immediately think of the etymology of the word, or where we have it from in English. And our word of faith is derived from the Latin fides, which was not only the Latin word denoting trust or trustworthiness, but it was the name of the goddess of trust. So whenever the Romans would be engaging in merchant transactions, they would have to swear by the goddess Fides that they are being trustworthy, or that they are trustable in this case. So perhaps nudging the conversation in that direction, conceiving of faith both as a wrestling with God, a relating with Him, and then somehow trusting in Him. You say that?
Yeah, I mean, it actually immediately makes me think of my experiences also, where uh, this um, journey that I take through my studies and through life, uh, I have to somehow find out who I am trusting really. Who is this God that I say I want to trust, or that
Mm.
says I need to trust in Him? Um, and I think one of my first experiences in studying theology was actually that suddenly I realized I don't know exactly who this God is. And that can be quite anxious to realize that you actually have much to learn about this God. And actually, it causes some anxiety because you realize you can't just have a grip on this God. You can't put him in a box.
Mm.
So you kind of have to go out there and find out who is really this God that yeah, um, that you trust.
That you dare to trust, right?
Yeah,
I
that you
mean,
dare to trust. Yeah.
as you've mentioned now, that that grappling with who is this object of one's trust, that's quite a feat because, as we often mention, trust is something that's earned. It doesn't just appear out of nowhere. So yeah, but I guess Tristan, with our heads working the way they do, if we continue down this rabbit hole, we're going to ask, well, what does it mean to trust? What is it? What is God, etc. So we might
Yeah,
we
yeah,
might be
yeah,
putting
yeah.
the wagon in front of the oxen. If we then conceive of faith as something between trusting in God and wrestling with Him, and we contrast doubt with that, what would be the implication? What is doubt then? To return to our theme.
Well, I would actually uh, resist that
Okay.
tendency to maybe uh, create or see contrasts in terms,
Mm-hmm.
and I would rather say, well, doubt is maybe part of faith or part of the faith journey that you have with God. Um, that you do actually need to ask questions and be curious and not know in order to know that you obviously need to find out more, basically, or that might not be well expressed, but um, you have so much to explore about this one God. That is something you can find out when you actually doubt Him,
Mm.
I think, because if you are ideally secure in your faith and know exactly who God is, then maybe it is actually necessary to go back and see just or yeah just see again or remind yourself um, who is God. Maybe God is more than what I think I
Mm.
already stand on, um, and that is where doubt, I think, uh, yeah, can lead us to actually courageously accept or think of other ways in which yeah, God reveals Himself to us.
Yes. Yes, I think, well, at the risk of going down a related but not pertinent avenue, um, I think one even sees something of the tension between a theology of glory and a theology of the cross here, because I think Luther states it rather clearly in his Luther actually touches upon this in his Heidelberg Disputation when stating that a theologian of glory who seeks to reduce God to these neatly arranged propositions that we have control over and we can fit into a perfect system which makes sense to us and which is, in some sense, under our control, he is very far from doing theology. Contrasting that with a theologian of the cross who looks at what happens there and can't understand it, yet somehow places his trust in that hidden God on the cross. Yeah, I think that perhaps paints something of a picture for us to work with.
Exactly, exactly. I mean, for example, the Israelites, of course, had an idea of how the Messiah would come,
Mm.
that he would come as the king of the Jews. And, you know, they had this picture, perhaps, many of them, that he would have a lot of power and be at the top of the social hierarchy. And yet, Jesus came as or was born in Bethlehem in a little manger, um, and had a very humble beginning. Uh, and the way that also this Messiah, through which God wants to reveal himself, then dies as a criminal, was a shock to the disciples,
Mm.
because they thought they knew what God was supposed to do, or who God is, that God will eventually, you know, um, use a king at the top of the hierarchy uh, to bring justice. But it was actually something where they learned this God might actually be a bit different to what they thought.
Indeed, indeed. And exactly what you said. One has, and I think in this image, you have a very beautiful vantage of the contrast which we have between doubt and faith. I mean, the Israelites had this definite, clear expectation, no questions asked. But then God decides to make an appearance in the most unexpected and one could even say irrational way possible. A little baby in a manger who will come to be the savior of the world and the king of creation. I mean, who can believe in that? Who can place their trust in that? And perhaps it brings us back, Tristan, to this conceiving of faith not as the opposite to doubt, or doubt as the opposite to faith, but as two parts of one picture. Think of a Rembrandt, with the light and the darkness not being part of different realities, but forming this coherent whole, which brings to the forth the beauty that we see reflected in reality. Um, yeah, well, I think we've had quite a few nice introductory words
Yeah, yeah. L-
on doubt.
Let me just ask you,
Mm.
perhaps, now that we've had so many abstract thoughts, maybe you could share something about how you actually experienced this, or how you
Oh.
came to some of these realizations about doubt and faith.
Yes, well, thank you. That's a very good question. Well, perhaps a short summary. I mean, I was raised, perhaps not unlike many of the listeners, in a Christian house, growing up with faith as a given. You're born into the church. You attend fairly regularly. You learn to say your prayers at a young age, and you learn to put your trust in loving Jesus, this supernatural figure whom is presented to you as the ultimately trustworthy one. Um, and there's something extremely beautiful regarding that faith, and I think something of it should persist into ripe old age. But one grows up and one changes. And I think for both of us, Tristan, as one has this pre-critical faith, which is beautiful and right, but as soon as one progresses to a more critical place in life, or a more critical mode of relating to this world, I think one's faith also has to account with new data, new challenges, perhaps a reconsideration of many prior ideas, which uh, disregarding their sincerity and disregarding their fittingness for that time and place, upon further inspection, are not really tenable. You can't hold to them as firmly as you once did. And so, to me, that came with a great, as Luther would have called it, Anfechtungen,
Mm.
during my first year of studying theology, um, during which I was first surprised by the rational basis of the Christian religion. I read C.S. Lewis as my first introductory text to theology, Mere Christianity, and it convinced me, perhaps with too much pride, of the the absolute demonstrability of the Christian faith. And then starting with studies at the Highland Theological College in Dingwall, Scotland, uh, I was presented with a lot of tools in order to critique my faith, but also defend it. And ever so suddenly, the more reasons I had to believe, the more uncertain I was of my faith. It was almost some sort of an unexpected difficulty. I mean, you're given it's like being told to make pancakes for the first time as a child, and you're so enthusiastic. I mean, you've seen your mother do it 1,000 times. You just want to run into the kitchen and do everything. I think a child who's told go and make pancakes would just run and start and continue until everything is messed up, but he'd be happy and content right until the end. But a child who wants to run into the kitchen and make pancakes and who's given a very detailed, complex recipe and all of the ingredients, I think he very well might come to the table and wonder, what the hell do I do with all of this? Like a kind of a being overwhelmed. And that was my experience after starting with theology. You've been given the tools, you've been told that there's a way to prove these things, and yet you feel utterly incapable and overwhelmed in the face of it. This was my first, I could say, serious grappling with doubt.
Definitely, yes. Our knowledge or what we think we can know can sometimes even be a hindrance to our faith.
Most definitely.
Yes, because maybe that's also related to the first story that we read in the Bible, where Adam and Eve, they eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and then suddenly, you know, they have. I guess we as humanity, we think we have this knowledge, and we think we are in control, and yet at the same time we actually realize, well, wait, we might we might not actually be so in control as we want to be, and that's where God shatters our idea of thinking we are gods, or thinking we can be in
We
total
can
control.
demonstrate him exactly. I
Yeah.
I like how you put it, but then I'd like to put the question back to you. Yeah, how have you experienced doubt?
Yeah, so for me, doubt, I think, came more in the form of anxiety often,
Hmm.
because that feeling of maybe emptiness or being bored or not knowing is exactly in what direction your thoughts have to go.
Mm.
Um, what, yeah, maybe again, what God are you directing yourselves towards, and what is really your purpose? Um, I mean, I dealt with that, but that was an important experience where I also saw that, doubt can actually be this chaos that you see within yourself, but also the world, but also, you see in terms of maybe a God who we say is in control, but unfortunately we also experience many moments of evil and suffering. Um, and yeah, uh, how to then um, have something to hold on to.
Mm.
That's a question of doubt, or an experience of doubt, I think. And on that note, I think actually we can move on to how we deal with it.
Mm.
And maybe I can just go ahead already
Please
and
do.
say the way I dealt with this was actually knowing that, first of all, I do not know, knowing that I won't get all the answers that I want, and then more importantly, that precisely because I do not know exactly from the world or from my experiences how to conceive of this God, I can actually look towards some story, some event that actually has an influence in the history. And of course, that's the story of Jesus Christ. That is a person that I can hold on to because he lived on earth, um, but he is also that uh, that he carries that message um, that I can really hold on to, because I don't necessarily need my knowledge or my thinking to actually conceive of this message, but actually
Mm.
I can simply trust and experience the goodness of the Lord through hearing what Jesus Christ did for me.
I think you hit the nail on the head. And regarding this holding on to Christ, I mean, obviously, one wishes to hold on to someone who is trustworthy. Um, one doesn't hold on for dear life to the stranger in the street who you've just met and who you know absolutely nothing of. One might, but one very well might also be disappointed. Um, and regarding Christ then, and regarding our holding on to Him, I think definitely we have to keep this tension that yes, though our trust cannot at the end of the day be purely rational or be completely reduced to easily demonstrable prepositions that we know. It's like going through a maths calculation. um, Sinner plus Christ equals saved. It's not that easy, unfortunately, but still I think that there are very many proofs and assurances, I think, when we critically engage with our faith, that gives us a basis on which to hold on to Christ, uh, not whilst being naive, not whilst being a how could one say completely unfounded in our clinging to Him. But perhaps that's definitely something we can grapple with further. One idea that I must say has come to give me quite a bit of comfort in the later years in my life, though, is not so much my holding on to Christ, but the promise that even when my grip seems to fail, He has guaranteed that He holds on to me. Because we've discussed doubt now, perhaps more as a theoretical, engagement with the idea of God and the making sense of reality and the making sense of life, or the dealing with suffering. But one other very actual experience of doubt in my case was, and still is, what they call practical atheism. So not a theoretical consideration of the non-existence of God or the pure mythical reality of Christ. No, no. My rational faculties cannot dismiss this great story so easily. But taking this great leap of faith and saying, I dare to believe, I dare to trust, one is immediately confronted by the reality that you do not live as though you really do believe, you really do trust. And to my mind, that is a much more difficult um, form which doubt takes. And I think in the midst of that, in the midst of, you know, when I look in the mirror and I see a person who, in his words, deeds, and thoughts, does not hold on to Christ, but holds on to a great many other things which end inevitably in disappointment. When I see him, myself, I wonder, goodness me, how can I hold on to Christ? And I think the easy and honest answer is I can't, not sufficiently. And at such a stage, to my mind, it is definitely a great comfort. This idea of not necessarily me dealing with my doubt and me bringing it to a solution, but Christ still holding on to me despite all this chaos of my practical atheism, of my living as though I most definitely do not trust um, in God, nor in His goodness, nor in much else. Yeah.
Exactly. I totally agree with that. That you know, uh, at some point we actually have to let go of our egos. That's what it basically sounds like to
Mm-hmm.
me. That um, we do falter and we do fall a lot. And I think one way then of dealing with doubt is also not to dismiss it or not to deny that we fall or that we doubt or that we struggle to trust in God sometimes, because that denial then might actually lead to that doubt growing and growing silently. And yeah, but then I also think we have a lot to take basically from not only thinking about ourselves and focusing on what we are doing and what we are doubting, how we are experiencing reality. I know that's something nowadays people like talking about, my individual experience. And I guess we're doing that here as well. But ironically, I also think there are always opportunities to actually throw the focus on Christ and what God has done for me, what God is wanting to do with me, and not just what I want and what I doubt and what I do.
Or fail to do.
Exactly.
Yes, I concur. I concur completely. But we must guard against this tendency of agreeing too much with one another. um,
Yeah, and I think these kind of thoughts don't mean we want to let go of any rational thoughts or
Definitely.
try to stop to reflect on these important ideas. On the contrary, it's we actually have the chance um, to say that we are capable of actually defending our faith or expressing our faith, and in this secular age, we might call it, we actually, as Christians, we do have a position to take, and we can actually voice our principles and our stance.
Most definitely. And I also think that in some instances we have a lot of explaining to do. Uh, the Christian faith has always set forth claims which are, at the very least, extremely controversial. And if one does not want to be critiqued or to be challenged, one doesn't go about making such controversial state claims as we have done in our faith. And so I think, uh, notwithstanding the fact that essentially our faith has to consist of this clinging to Christ for dear life, because at the end of the day, that's it's either we do that or we fend for ourselves. Um, all that notwithstanding, I think we have to maintain uh, accountability for the fact that we do take certain stances and we have to defend them. And I think we can defend them, and we have been defending them for the last 2 millennia. I think we've done much better a job of it in the past as we are doing in the present necessarily. But the main point I'm trying to make is that Christian faith is not fideistic. It is not an easy believism. It is not a, take my word for it, or just wait for in my previous university, we referred to it as the Mormon fuzzies, this warm and cuddly feeling in your insides that affirms whatever you very deeply want to believe. No, 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 no. I think the Christian faith is essentially a faith which claims to be true, and as such needs to give account for the basis upon which one clings to Christ as the truth. I mean, clinging to Him is, I think, very well relate. Well, you could draw a parallel and say clinging to Christ is, in fact, clinging to the truth and the way and the life, just not in the ugly abstract form, but in the personalized, incarnated form. But upon that, one could elaborate in volumes.
Of course, of course. Yeah, and maybe just to end off, maybe we could just share maybe what we would tell someone who's just starting out as a theology student, what they could perhaps expect and how they could deal with these kind of challenges that we just mentioned.
That's a wonderful idea. Um, you know, I would first say, uh, maintain your cautious enthusiasm because it's a beautiful thing. You know, there's this saying that there is no smarter creature than a second year theological student. And I think it has to be true. I mean, you have to learn. Pride comes before the fall, as they say. So you do need some of that naive vigor, but I think it should be accompanied with humility. You know, standing broad-shouldered in defense of this great faith of ours is a wonderful thing. But acknowledging one's defeats and acknowledging one's blows is also a wonderful thing. And I think, you know, at the end of the day, it's not your shoulders that have to bear the burden of Christianity's truth claims and of Christ's trustworthiness. It's his shoulders. Yours can't bear it, his can. But I would say, I have a tendency to talk too much. We will be realizing a lot more of this throughout the course of this podcast. But I would say, you know, if you want to engage with your faith, engage seriously. If you want to engage with your doubt, engage seriously as well.
Yeah, exactly. Don't just let it go. Don't just think, okay, I'm done thinking about this. This is just, it all doesn't make sense. People have been thinking about these things for 2 millennia, and with good reason. And I think that's also the point where we both can just say, don't stop asking the questions, don't stop thinking, but also at some point, don't stop trusting just because you doubt. And with that, Pirje and I would like to thank you for listening. And just a disclaimer, we're not saying we're expressing or saying all of this perfectly. We're kind of letting the conversation flow, and we're open to comments and suggestions, and we would actually like to know how you deal with doubt in your life. From the Festerburg podcast, goodbye.
Amen.